Greetings, welcome back to Black Bear News. Please remember to like the video and to make sure that you are still subscribed. I got this from Marty McCorkle, left a link. This is not a comment from him. This is a link from him. This is a great link. And I'm just going to kind of cover this blog post, article, study, whatever it is. This is really great information. This is great information for me because, well, I'm not so much in the process of trying to figure out where I'm going to go. It's always kind of in the back of my mind. Because I live in Los Angeles. So, I mean, you know, if you live in a large megalopolis, Los Angeles, New York, you know, Houston, San Francisco, somewhere in Florida. If you live in a high population area or any large city, we could go with Chicago or, that area too. It would be really wise to have an escape plan or to figure out where you're going to go. A lot of people do have, escape plans, or they have, bunkers or houses or other dwellings that they have kind of ready at standby. I do not have one of those things. So, but it is kind of always in the back of my mind. And a few years ago, I was actively trying to figure out where I was going to live. I thought I was going to not live in Los Angeles anymore and that I was going to live somewhere else. And as I dug deeper into information, it became interesting to see what was feasible, what was not, what were good areas, what was not. I think that my instincts and my hunches were actually pretty spot on. I narrowed it down to like the Great Lakes region somewhere, or Northern California, Southern Oregon. So with all that being said, and I think that there's probably other places too, maybe the upper Great Plains, Montana, Dakotas, Idaho. I think somewhere in there probably would be a good spot as well. But anyways, before I get too deep into just rambling about this, I'm going to talk about this article, which is titled Peak Energy and Resources, Climate Change and the Preservation of Knowledge. Or maybe this is the title of the blog. I don't know. It says energyskeptic.com. But maybe this is the title of the blog. Okay, so sorry about that. Scientists on where to be in the 21st century based on sustainability. This is the actual blog post from November 22nd, 2019. So just a few days ago. This is recent. Preface, the article below is based on Hall and Day's book, America's Most Sustainable Cities and Regions Surviving the 21st Century Megatrends, related articles, et cetera, et cetera. Sustainability and place, how emerging megatrends of the 21st century will affect humans and nature at the landscape level. 5 scientists have written a peer-reviewed article about where the best and worst places will be in the future in America based on how sustainable a region is when you take into account climate change, energy reserves, population, sea level rise, increasingly strong hurricanes, and other factors. 3 of the scientists, John W. Day, David Pimentel, and Charles Hall, are rock stars in ecology. I haven't heard of either or any of them. Below are some excerpts from this 16-page paper that I found of interest. Best places to be. So this map here basically says the greener the better, unless there are too many people. Circles indicate large cities. So lots of green area here. Also lots of circles where the green is. I'm going to get into my, summation of this at the end. It's not, nothing earth-shattering and probably not new information to a lot of people. And again, this only takes into account the United States. Globally, how does this apply? How does all this information apply? Who knows? Has anybody done studies like this for Europe, Asia, Canada, South America, Central America, Africa, etc. Australia. Who's done any of these kinds of studies? And this is an interesting map. Move to an underperforming region and away from a mega region. Many areas rich in natural resources have often have high poverty rates, perhaps due to the resource curse, usually applied internationally to countries rich in fossil fuels, agriculture, forestry, and fisheries, but financially poor with stratified social classes. Basically, these are places where corporations or people come in, extract the resources, and sometimes giving the local community jobs, sometimes not. Sometimes they import all the jobs. And when they pick up and leave the drilling site or the mining site or the logging site or whatever, whoever's there is, shit out of luck. You can see above, the most underperforming counties are rural. There are regions that have not kept pace with natural trends over the last 3 decades in terms of population, employment, and wages. Note that with the exception of the Great Lakes mega region, the underperforming regions are outside of the 11 mega regions. These underperforming areas generally have high natural resources and agricultural production. As you can see here, most, high plains, Great Plains, or Northern Rockies, even down into Texas, Rio Grande, Mississippi Delta, Great Lakes. So the mega regions, though, kind of incorporate the Great Lakes, the Northeast, this area here through, like Georgia, kind of skirting Tennessee, but through Mississippi and Alabama. Florida, Texas, Louisiana, Southern California, the Bay Area, and Seattle, Portland. So these are places you want to stay away from, of course, mega regions or, population centers. These underperforming areas generally have high natural resource and agricultural production. So yes, this is very interesting map here. Worst places to be. So obviously the red. Northwest, Seattle, Portland, all of the Southwests. Here I am in the reddest of the red, the worst possible place. This is the worst possible place to be when climate change rears its ugly fangs, its nasty, sharp, pointy fangs, and starts to take out whole areas. This is the area you do not want to be in. Over here, Phoenix, all along the Gulf Coast, Florida, all along the East Coast, Great Lakes, but not so bad in the Great Lakes. The Great Lakes look like a mixed bag, right? So it's pretty red, but not quite all the way red. It looks like there might be some pockets here that might be good. Several areas of the U.S. will have compromised sustainability in the 21st century. These include the southern Great Plains, the Southwest, the southern half of California, the Gulf and Atlantic coasts, especially southern Louisiana and southern Florida, and areas of dense population such as South Florida and the Northeast. My comment, you should also consider how long forests will last in your area. People will be burning them to cook and heat their homes with and eventually make furniture, homes, floors, spoons, hundreds of other objects as shown in the Foxfire series. There were 92 million people in 1920, just 29% of the population we have now. To zero in on the details, see this account of what happened in Vermont. I'm going to go back up here for a second, but this is a really key map down here. So going back to like my instincts of where I wanted to be, actually Northern California was looking not so bad. Northern California, Southern Oregon, on the eastern side of Oregon. Great Lakes, not so much. Still kind of dangerous, but lots of water and lots of rain in the Great Lakes area. So lots of opportunities to grow food and have access to water. This is a crazy map. Approximate location of virgin old growth forests in 1620, 1850, and 1920. So here 1620. In about 230 years, there had been some foresting going on, but still most of that there. Within 70 years, look at the devastation of the old growth forest. And there's a link here to what happened in Vermont. Quite interesting. Vermont was just literally cleared of forests and logged really heavily. And Vermont is quite green now. There's been a lot of reforestation and people figuring out how to live with the land. And there's, the regreening has been quite extensive. Future trends. The trends of energy scarcity, climate change, population, and many other factors are likely to reduce the sustainability of the landscape humans depend on. In some places more than others, since materials and energy both limited and distributed unevenly. Industrial agriculture is very energy intensive, 19% of the total energy use in the U.S. 14% of that is agricultural production, food processing, and packaging, 5% for transportation and preparation. Each American uses 528 gallons a year in oil equivalents to supply their food, or 169 billion gallons of oil for 320 million Americans. That's just for food. About 33% of the energy required to produce 2.5 acres of crops is invested in machine operation. On average, nearly 10 calories of energy are used to make 1 calorie of edible food. Cropland provides 99.7% of the global human food supply measured in calories, with less than 1% coming from the sea. Global per capita use is half an acre for cropland and 1.25 acres of pasture land. The U.S. and Europe use 1.25 acres of cropland and 2 acres of pasture land. Cropland now occupies 17% of the total area in the U.S., but little additional land is available or even suitable for future agricultural expansion. As the U.S. population increases, climate impacts grow, and energy resources decrease, there will be less cropland area per capita. A significant portion of food produced in the U.S. is irrigated and located in areas where water shortages will increase. We have lost agricultural land since 1950. In 1950, there were 1.25 million acres. In the year 2000, there were less than 1 million acres, down 21.5%. Crops need a lot of water. Some use 265 to 530 gallons of water per 2.2 pounds of crops produced. Corn needs 10 million liters per hectare. Soybean, 6 million liters per hectare. Wheat requires only about 2.4 million liters per hectare for a yield of 2.7, I'm guessing, tons per hectare. Under semi-arid conditions, yields of non-irrigated crops, such as corn, are low even when ample amounts of fertilizer are applied. Approximately 40% of the water use in the United States is used solely for irrigation. Reducing irrigation dependence in the U.S. would save significant amounts of energy, but probably require that crop production shift from the dry and arid western regions to more agriculturally suitable eastern U.S. Why cities will be bad. The cities most dependent on cheap energy will be most affected, especially the Southwest and the southern Great Plains. U.S. population increased steadily from 3.9 million in 1790 to nearly 310 million in 2010, or almost 8,000% in just 220 years, an exponential growth rate of almost 2%. Life also became progressively more urbanized, and by 2010, 259 million people, or 83%, lived in urban areas compared to 56 million in rural areas. If you want to know where to go, where there's going to be a lot less people, that's out into the woods or into the lands, away from the cities. The maintenance of large urban megaregions requires enormous and continuous inputs of energy and materials. Modern industrial society and modern cities are inherently unsustainable. Some have argued that larger urban areas are more energy efficient than rural areas, but Fragius examined the relation between city size and greenhouse gas emissions and found that emissions scale proportionally with urban population size for U.S. cities, and that larger cities are not more emissions efficient than smaller ones. In a review of energy and material flows through the world's 25 largest urban areas, Decker 2000 also concluded that large urban areas are only weakly dependent on their local environment for energy and material inputs, but are constrained by their local areas for supplying water and absorbing waste. Rees contends that if cities are to be sustainable in the future, they must rebalance production and consumption, abandon growth, and relocalize. The trajectory of megatrends of the 21st century will make this difficult for all large urban areas in the U.S. and impossible for some. By 2025, it is estimated that 165 million people, or about half the population, will live in 4 mega regions: the Northeast, Great Lakes, Southern California, and San Francisco. An additional 45 million will live in South Florida and the Houston-Dallas region. That's the supply lines that support these mega regions with food, energy, and other materials stretch for long distances across the landscape. Areas dependent on longer energy-intensive supply lines are vulnerable to the rising cost of energy for transportation. This next part I find really interesting. Best cities to live in, but many cities have lost population, especially those that were based in the manufacturing sector of the economy during the 20th century. Detroit and Flint, Michigan are often cited as examples, but there are many others. Between 1950 and 2000, St. Louis lost 59% of its population. Pittsburgh, Buffalo, Detroit, and Cleveland lost more than 45% each. So just a break right here. In my travels, I've traveled to New York. I traveled to Detroit and St. Louis quite often, and people don't know this, but St. Louis, some parts of St. Louis look a lot like Detroit. On the whole, I think St. Louis is probably doing better than Detroit. But there are areas of St. Louis that look as abandoned and gutted and burned out as Detroit, some areas of Detroit, because of poverty, because of population moving away. And there are large tracts of land in St. Louis, also in Detroit. People in Detroit have started farming these large tracts of land in the urban center of the city. And so there's a lot of farming going on in Detroit. Not so much in St. Louis, but lots of areas, lots of kind of abandoned homes with tracts of land beside them ready to go. Pittsburgh, Buffalo, Detroit, and Cleveland, also true. It is possible that many of the Rust Belt cities that have experienced population decreases will be more sustainable than more successful cities in the Northeast and other areas. They now have a lower population density and tend to exist in rich agricultural regions. So this is key information, and think about this when making up your mind where you might want to go. Worst cities to live in, by contrast, the Northeast is the most densely populated region in the country. Population is expected to reach almost 60 million by 2025. The states that make up the region have about 34 million acres of farmland, or about 0.2 hectares per person. By contrast, it takes 1.2 hectares per capita to provide the food consumed in the U.S. If agriculture becomes more local and less productive, as some predict due to increasing energy costs, then it will be a challenge to maintain the current food supply to the Northeast. The least sustainable region will likely be the southwestern part of the country, from the southern plains to California. Climate change is already impacting this region, and it is projected to get hotter and drier. Winter precipitation is predicted to be more rain and less snow. That is already happening. These trends will lead to less water for direct human consumption and for agriculture. This is critical since practically all agriculture in the region is irrigated. The Southwest has the lowest level of ecosystem services of any region in the U.S. California is the most populous state in the nation, with most people living in the southern half of the state. The area with highest water stress, the Los Angeles metro area, is the second largest in the nation. Absolutely the worst place to be. Here I am in the epicenter. But population density is low over much of the rest of the region. Also something to remember if you do live in Southern California. And it's concentrated in Las Vegas, Phoenix, and Albuquerque. California is one of the most important. So there's lots of land here in the Southwest. It will be highly stressed unless you have a direct water source or a local water source. You're going to have a hard time. California is one of the most important food-producing states in the nation, but this will be threatened by water scarcity, increasing energy costs. Much of the region is strongly dependent on tourism and spending discretionary income, especially Las Vegas, so future economic health will likely be compromised in coming decades. Many cities and regions whose economy is dependent on tourism will have compromised sustainability. So, yeah, this is almost to the end here. Energy scarcity. World oil production peaked in 2005. Fracking is not sustainable. Few bullet points here, mostly pointing out the Southwest is the worst. Flooding in Mississippi Basin and all along the tributaries of the Mississippi River. Stronger hurricanes on in the Gulf and Atlantic coast. Surge waters in the Gulf and Atlantic coasts. Energy scarcity will affect everyone, everywhere. So yeah, I'm going to link this. This is really a great resource for anybody who's moving or thinking of moving, or there's a lot of people already set up with their off-grid living situations or their farming situations. There are many that watch this channel that live, specifically, intentionally where they live because of future climate change problems. Some people, not so much. My takeaway from this is that I still think that Northern California is still good. Certain pockets of the Great Lakes. So my actual thought is like Southern Illinois, Missouri, Nebraska, parts of maybe parts of Kansas. Maybe not so much. Those areas are going to be really good areas to be in because they have lots of rainfall, lots of agriculture there. Especially like Missouri has some interesting topography as well. So there's farmland in Missouri, but the lower part of Missouri into Arkansas has also like a lot of woods and like caves and caverns and interesting areas that might be possibly like good places to live. Yeah, I found this extremely interesting, extremely good resource, knowledge source in my searches for where I wanted to live a few years ago. I wish that something like this was out there. There were a few articles kind of like this out there, but seems a little more extensive to me. But I'll post this in the description box. That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for your eyes, your ears, and your conscience. If you would like to support this channel, you can do so at the links below. Until next time, peace.